Welcome to the LSA Thursday Talks. I'm delighted. My name is Samantha Hardingham. I am the Academic Director at the LSA, and delighted to be chairing this session again today, and really pleased to invite and welcome Amandeep Singh Kalra from BeFirst. BeFirst have been amazing supporters of the LSA in all sorts of ways as part of our practice network. Just really so pleased to have Amandeep here to talk about policy and regeneration, the snappy title of today's talk, which I know will be incredibly informative. Just by way of very brief introduction, the way Thursday talks go, I will introduce our speaker. Amandeep will then give his talk, and then we will be open for questions and discussion. So please be ready with your questions. It is absolutely not the point that I dominate the room. It is entirely an opportunity for you all as audience to have a discussion with Amandeep. So without further ado, just a little bit of background. BeFirst are based in the London Borough of Barking Dagenham. They collaborate with designers and contractors to create projects that improve the municipal realm for local people and communities to live and work. Amandeep is an architect and urban designer and associate director at BeFirst, and will speak today. We will find out very soon, but I think explore really more closely how collaboration and stakeholder engagement play a really central role in producing municipal projects. So just to sort of a little bit more about Amandeep as an individual, and not just as a representative of BeFirst, is also a trustee of the London Neighbourhood Scholarship. So is really a champion of equality and providing scholarships for people from disadvantaged backgrounds. He's a design council expert, member of the Southwark, Harrow and Hackney Chair Design Review panels, and is also on the Open City Accelerate Advisory Board. External critic at a number of other institutions, well-known institutions, and has mentored architecture students with the ROBA. So how on earth he has time to think about such critical and important issues as policy and regeneration is amazing, but clearly he embeds that in everything he does at every opportunity. So I'm going to hand over to you now, Amandeep, and look forward to a discussion following your talk.
Thanks, Sam. People have always told me if you wanted something done, you ask a really busy person to do it, because somehow they always make the time for it. So maybe that's how I've managed to say yes to a lot of things, even though there's loads going on. So hopefully you can see that slide, and I'm just moving on. Starting knee deep straight in there. So I've actually got a picture on screen, hopefully you can see, is the estate that I grew up in about 10 years, and it's a council estate in Kingston, and that dotted line, which might be quite faint for most of you, is the exact flat that we stayed at, we lived in for that period of time. And the homes generally across the buildings and areas were quite poor condition. The open spaces were quite unsafe, not very usable, and the crime rate because of it and because of that condition was very high. And there was no real sense of community. And I bring this up for two reasons. One, I think the word estate and housing, I think here was definitely a sinkhole rather than a springboard or a platform. So I think the question to ask here is, how could housing, particularly social housing, and neighborhoods be more equitable and provide springboards rather than sinkholes, particularly for those in our societies that need those the most? And the second one is about feeling powerless as a community, right? When there's a lack of sense of community and there isn't this kind of bond of people coming together, there is you feel powerless against a sizable institution like a council. So how, the second question I'm going to try and talk through the slide is, how can you empower a community to take collective ownership and action? So as Samantha has already told you guys, we are Barking Dagenham's wholly owned regeneration company, based in East London, surrounded by 5 boroughs, also edging the bottom of Thames, the River Thames, and also loads of various kind of transport nodes running through it. But I think there is 2 parts of the borough's history which are going to be running themes throughout the presentation. And one of them is industry. And I've got a picture of the Ford factory here, which is a really important sort of legacy of the borough. At its peak, it employed 40,000 people, I think in 1953, and it still produces engines in the borough now. And that's really important because connected to that, so that rich industrial heritage, which partly existed there because of the Thames, but also the various river roading and kind of arteries of watercourses that ran through the borough, which enabled transportation of goods. The second thing tied to that is housing at scale. And this is an image, an aerial image of the Becontree Estate. It's so vast, you can only really properly capture it in its fullest when you're that high up. And it is the largest housing estate in UK, and it was at some point in Europe as well. And it was built as part of a slum clearance program by the then GLC, where kind of the historic notions of the architects department that prevailed in councils existed. And this estate spread over 3 local authorities, and it's an interwar estate, and it has 29,000 homes. And it housed a lot of the workers of those factories that I showed earlier in the previous slide. So here what you see is this kind of historic relationship of industry and housing going hand in hand for a long, long time in the borough. And actually the kind of remnants, but also the impact of that is still exists in the estate in terms of the roots, the kind of the severances and part of the kind of historic legacy of that. If we zoom then slightly back out to the borough itself, this is a map our team drew to embed in the new local plan that is just out for consultation. And in here, actually, you can see future growth areas indicated by the kind of little kind of diagrams of houses and kind of icons of these little axos throughout. And actually, you can see there's quite a lot happening at the very top and quite a lot happening by the very bottom. And a little bit on the east and the west. And that's largely because in the middle, sandwiched, is this Becontree Estate, which I just mentioned, which actually covers 40% of the borough. And it's this kind of low-scale suburban housing where there isn't the same kind of opportunities that other estate regeneration areas we have, or the industrial areas. So the 2 key areas for redevelopment, which go back to the kind of 2 earliest slides of the historic background of the borough, are the kind of biggest opportunities in the borough, which is the existing estates that have been here for a while and the kind of industrial areas and the industrial kind of estates in the borough as well. And that's where most of this shows future kind of projects and interesting developments around. Now that's the opportunities, but actually there's a whole load of challenges which aren't just unique to Barking and Dagenham. There are quite a lot of them apply to London, but particularly if you zoom in on some of them, it's quite paints quite a kind of tricky and challenging picture. So it's got the borough's got some of the lowest life expectancy, actually the lowest life expectancy in London and the UK. And if you look at kind of the difference between men and women compared to Kensington and Chelsea, there's almost like 11 years between men have a lower life expectancy and about 7 years for women. And similarly, if you're looking at incomes as well, average incomes throughout the borough of 29,000, whereas I think you can see London substantially higher, and actually UK higher as well. And that kind of case is similar for higher rates of unemployment. And the other challenges is that prevail in loads of London boroughs is long housing waiting lists. So we've got over 7,000 people, and that would mean that and only 600 homes per year sort of become available. So it'd be if nothing else changed, there was no more demand, it would take 10 years to kind of fill that. And we obviously know that's not the case. Demand is always rising. So that's a sort of summary of the challenges. And we kind of sit in this position where we are building homes, enriching neighborhoods, creating jobs and empowering communities whilst balancing those challenges of the borough and hopefully helping to alleviate quite a lot of those. So what makes BeFirst unique? There's a couple of things, I think. One is the delivery model, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. And then is about our multidisciplinary clienting team. And that's quite interesting because historically what you might have in a local authority is various departments doing overlapping bits of regeneration or policy or planning, and kind of this is quite interesting because it pulls those powerful departments together into one organization to act as a change across the borough. The third one is strategic and experimental. And I really like this one because this talks about how you can be both zoomed out, kind of take this broad brush approach where you're able to have a bird's eye view, but actually then dive in and try to resolve some of the most complex problems of today by being a bit more experimental and innovating. And I'll share some projects of those that share that too. The last one is empowering communities, and I think we work quite hard to make this a really important part of what we do, which is estate regeneration in homes and kind of changes in an area not being done to people, people being part of that change and people actually driving that change themselves that live there, and then championing it. So I think that's a big part and a running theme across all the projects that I might share today. So bear with me, there's a lot of diagrams here. I'm going to put on some really nice pictures shortly as well. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the actual model, the BeFirst model itself. So this is a 100% wholly owned company, but owned by the council, and it's mainly designed to build for rent rather than build for sale. And it directly typically operates on its own land, but also facilitates regeneration on third-party sites. So we're an interesting team that represents that sort of cross-departmental collaboration. And we mainly build affordable and market to rent homes and with a small amount of shared ownership. The idea of this is that all the land that the council owns and the homes we develop are retained by council in perpetuity, which means rather than creating these inconsistent cash injections when you sell homes, you're actually incrementally increasing the income stream of the council over time. And those homes that are built, are letting preference is given to those that live or work in the borough. And whereas typically you might have a private for sale developer that might build in an area, sell, and then move on, the council is a sort of permanent and long-term custodian of the borough. So you are going to be having an ambition towards creating a neighborhood and a place and a space that is all about long-term stewardship. And lastly, that all the homes we develop are tenure blind, and not just sort of externally, as I hope is the case, quite norm for most developers, but also internally in the finishes inside of the kitchens, the floors. And this means getting rid of the poor door, poor house completely, rather than just the poor door. And in this diagram here, I'm just going to explain briefly. So if we have LBBD, which is London Borough of Barking and Dagenham at the top, they commission those homes, and that's the home in the center. BeFirst is the developer and the facilitator of those homes, and any profits we make are returned back to the council. And we have then stewards who are companies that maintain or heat through district heating systems, and they kind of let heat and maintain those homes, and they also return that income back to the council. And then we have the citizens who have helped co-design these homes, and they have this continual feedback loop with us, but also relationship in terms of having those homes managed by the council. And what we do is obviously we commission consultants, architects, contractors, and specialists to develop those homes with us. So inside this BeFirst melting pot, excuse my fun diagram, is a series of departments that I mentioned exist within a council typically, whether it's the regen department, the capital delivery department, which normally takes projects from planning to building them out on site, procurement department that's about making sure that you follow public sector procurement rules in terms of appointing people fairly. Engagement teams that have always had a long-term relationship with the residents of the borough. The planning department, which not only makes a decision on somebody's house extension, but also decisions on 10,000 home master plans, as well as setting new local legislation and planning policy that will be determining how housing and land changes in the borough for decades. And then within that, we have our design team. And actually, what's really interesting is our team works across all those teams to bring visions to life, identifying new opportunities, creating new planning policy, but also setting high quality standards throughout all our projects. And that's the team. And I've only just spotted actually that this is definitely a coincidence and not by design, but like almost 50% of the people in these images are LSA graduates or current LSA students. So definitely not a biased thing there, but just coincidence by design. But anyway, that's our team. And these are the 4 streams that we work across. I'm just going to go around clockwise. So starting with design, I think in design, we work quite closely in creating visions and master plans for large scale areas, and that can include industrial intensification areas for 10,000 homes and new commercial areas for new parts of the borough, to as small as doing capacity studies on a site for 20 homes or an infill site. And that service there, actually, we work not just with and not just on housing, but also other parts of the council that are developing a new school or a new youth centre, just working quite closely with them to do that. We also then work with the planning team quite closely in giving advice on any planning application that comes through the borough, whether it's BeFirst or not, and we provide that feedback to ensure a kind of high quality datum is applied across the borough, irrespective of whether it's our homes or not. And then guardianship. So how in the guardianship section, we help client the projects that we deliver ourselves, but we also ensure that we are on site monitoring that delivery of quality. So I'll be there on site reviewing samples, to reviewing drawings, or being in contractor meetings when we're talking about value engineering. And lastly, about strategy. And this is interesting because this is about forward thinking. This isn't necessarily always day-to-day work. This is about how do we do things that we do now better in the future. So this means about establishing our sustainability strategy. It means looking at how we work in the future with modern methods of construction, or how do we integrate new systems of potentially AI and other ways of working that are kind of more forward facing. So we work quite a lot in creating those strategies. And in the center is the residents, which are kind of a golden thread in all of those pieces of work we do. So just some headline summaries of some stats. I always like a bit of stats because it's sort of, I can say all of the stuff I want, but actually if you look at some numbers, that starts to paint a bit more of a transparent picture. So in 2021, we completed 402 homes, and we've currently got just under 2,000 homes on site. And 70% of those homes are affordable rent. And affordable rent has loads of meanings, but at least 30% of that is true social council house level of rent. And we are building 1 in 5 of the homes built in London by a local authority is built by us. So at the scale we're kind of working at right now is pretty big. And the plan is still to carry on doing that at a scale of 600 homes a year for the next 10 years on average. And what I'm going to do now is just take you through a selection of projects that might be a policy, a park, a master plan, a house, or a shed, and talk through some of the themes I've just discussed earlier, but actually show them realized through a project at various scales. So starting with a master plan, and we're going to talk about the Gascoigne Estate because this is a really important long-term regeneration project for us. And this is based in the southeastern part of the borough, highlighted here, really right next to, very close to the Barking station. Bit of history on the estate, on this estate, and again, no surprises. The 2 images I showed at the beginning, very similar story on the Gascoigne Estate. There is the duo of housing and industry. So just by the roading and the docks, you've got fishing industries and chemical industries. And the Gascoigne Estate itself was built with a more traditional street pattern that supported the workers and the families working in these industries. So they worked hand in glove. And post 1900s, there was part bomb damage, but also part a need to sort of pave the way for new ways of living, and introducing a new typology into the area that potentially intensified and created more housing. So the estates post 1950s, and actually 1971 was completed, which took that kind of more typical street pattern of housing and redeveloped it into what is the Gascoigne Estate now, which is a series of point blocks, concrete point blocks across the estate, as well as some lower scale blocks. And what that looks now, or sorry, in the 2000s, is actually an area that's quite unnavigatable. It has public realm that is quite inaccessible and compromised and not always well overlooked. And the quality of the homes aren't as good as they should be, given where we currently are. And actually, this echoes with some of all of those things that I showed in the very first image in the estate that I was in, and what has become of this estate. And actually, when these kind of ingredients come together and sort of maintenance budgets are slashed and an estate becomes in this over time, high crime rates actually create really a recipe for disaster. So lots of reasons why the council, long time ago in 2008, developed a master plan at that time with Allies and Morrison. Number of options were on the table: refurbishment, redevelopment, part demolition, but ultimately a kind of whole-scale redevelopment was drawn up. There's two halves to the estate, an eastern side and western side bisected by a road. And actually what you're seeing on the very right is, I guess, that like the architect's vision to bring about those more traditional street patterns that existed before the point block typology, which reintroduced that kind of urban fabric kind of penetration, so people are able to quite easily navigate, walk east to west back to the station. If you look on the left, actually the blue plan shows the blocks of the estate as it in that kind of post 1950s concrete era, where you can actually, it's really difficult to make out a street pattern. Actually, if you're trying to follow across, right, where is there a route to go to a station or cross it, it's very difficult, and very much that is the case. So a big part of the master plan was, how do you recreate permeability in an estate that was not really geared up for that? And as part of that, a really interesting placemaking proposal was created so that we could not just talk about permeability within the estate, but also how do you connect back to the town centre? How do you connect back to the park, the two parks that are very close by? How do you connect back to the river roading, or other areas? And I think all of that reconnectivity is really important when you have the historic legacy of council estates that were built with this kind of clear border, very unnavigatable, fenced off with these kind of no ball signs. So very much opening it back up is a big part of the agenda. So what we've got going on now, this is a couple of images showing some of the projects that have been completed. Some of these are by White Architecture, a Swedish-based practice. These are some really lovely homes that have been completed, and actually there's a really good variety of flats, maisonettes, of family sizes for starter families, and little house, like smaller scale houses as well. So this is kind of up on the first floor podium deck, and doing some really subtle things, like in here you can see the exact same brick, just using a very different mortar treatment to create some really interesting variety in the house type. So from a raked mortar, which is what looks like the dark mortar, to a flush mortar on the right. And some more images of kind of how some of our newer blocks start to stitch in and create spaces with the existing blocks as well. So you can see on the left the 3-story existing blocks as well, starting to create edges and courtyards with some of our newer developments as well that look to intensify and create more council housing, as well as private homes. And similarly, we also have these are the phases that are currently on site right now. So this is facing the park. And what's really interesting here is we're really starting to experiment with using off-site construction, using bathrooms, en-suites, utility pods, like within a concrete frame that you can see on the right here. So all these boxes that have been craned in, ready to install, but also like these prefabricated facade panels, which really help in kind of answering those goals of How do we build more sustainable homes? How do we create homes for deconstructibility? How do we speed up the delivery of homes? How do we make better quality homes but also make them cheaper? So they're like kind of paradoxical questions, but there are some ways we're experimenting to answer that. And actually, staying on this estate and talking about a park, this is an image of one of the plots within the Gascoigne Estate that was left um, as a site just hoarded up, and an opportunity that myself and a colleague spotted, that actually this site is a site for a future phase, which was going to be left in this way for a number of years. And we thought actually this could do so much more. There are two fantastic trees in this space. There's a lack of amenity space in the area. And why don't we convene a group of residents and experiment with co-design, which is something we've never done in the borough at all. We've had a very engaged residents board, but actually we thought, let's create a residents forum at the height of lockdown, I think. So not only the challenge of we've never done it before, let's do it at a time we can't meet anybody in person. And I think a big ambition of ours was not to just do your usual call out and see what happens, is actually let's find out very clearly who lives on the estate and make sure we are able to represent that exact demographic in a way that we actually can use to shape a space that actually best represents what all these residents want to do. So these are some of the residents, the snapshot, and we had 20 residents virtually co-designing using Miro over a 6-month period. And I'm not going to go through these, but it just shows you the depth of engagement and the kind of things that were collated from really early ideas about people wanting areas to come together, spaces for play, areas for sport, and like all these ideas somehow had to come together in one place, which was, the residents' challenge really, because they were helping co-design this. So they started from there and then started bullet pointing ideas of what it would look like and start kind of using icons to shape where things would go. Very much putting the pencil into the resident's hand. And that led to this really interesting space that we designed, which was bringing together a sort of sensory space for a bit of quiet area, play space for children, an exercise area, a kind of big, long communal table for kind of birthday parties, and then also a grow your own area as well, which looks like this. So this was completed a year and a half ago. It's been shortlisted for quite a few awards, and it actually just shows how you can create actually much better spaces when sometimes as designers and architects and landscape architects, we take the pencil and the ego out of our hands and place it a little bit more closely with those people that are going to be using those spaces. And the space itself didn't cost us very much. We worked, we split the cost with the contractors' social value commitments and our own. 113 volunteer hours were used to make this from various supply chains. I was there on site building with my hands, as well as lots of my team. And we made quite a big effort, it being a kind of temporary 5-year space, that actually we reclaimed and recycled as many of the materials as possible. So actually 75% of the materials were reclaimed. That meant we saved over 10,000 kilograms of carbon emissions. And in this image here, you can actually see where that is. So you've got scaffold balls used as benches around the tree. You've got felled trees over here. You've got this, all of the joists in here were reclaimed joists from an adjacent demolition. The brick pavers here are left over from a different site project that were going to be discarded. And there's pallets being used all across for planters, etc. So residents really grabbed those ideas and turned it into this amazing space. And I think the success of spaces like this is really measured 1 year later, 2 year later, and 3 year later. Are they still being used? Do they still serve a function? And actually about 20 months on, the wealth of things that have happened in here are quite incredible. We've had the Islamic Iftar prayers, kind of Ramadan meals in there. We've had the Queen's Jubilee party. We've had all sorts. We've had harvest days from this local chap that's taken over the grow your own areas. And we've had people doing birthday parties and all sorts. So really the space has been taken over. And the reason for that ultimately is all these people that help shape it. And this image is full of councillors, elected councillors, residents, contractors, me as well on the very right, and all those people that have helped shape it. So that's where the true success has actually come from. going from that scale to the scale, and I call this a house, but it's not just a house, it's a house for artists. And I think this is quite interesting to talk about, and I'm going to start with this, which is a snapshot of an FT article, opinion piece that was written that quotes the leader of the council, which talked about we don't want snobbery, and it really talked about aspiration and not gentrification, lying behind the attempts to engage with art in a different way. And I think historically, artists have been seen to be used to regenerate areas, raise land values, and often outprice themselves out of a borough. Um, Most artists, average artists' income are less than £10,000 in the area, and actually, what ends up happening is artists regenerate an area and unfortunately do themselves out of a home. So this was about a very different model for creating a permanent place for artists to engage communities that often don't really engage much with art. And that was the mission for creating House for Artists, which was a collaboration between the GLA, Create London, the council, and ourselves. And it's a really interesting but quite small building. And the building itself, you can see, is built out of exposed reinforced concrete, which has on the ground floor this communal, shared communal area, which is where the kind of community-based exhibition spaces would be, but also some of the workshops. But on the upper floors is where the 12 homes for the different artists are stacked on top. And it's really this kind of piece that sits and stands out, but also doesn't stand out because it's got this kind of seriousness and playfulness about it. And that's what this kind of ground floor feels like. It's very much transparent and seen as this kind of canvas and gallery space for people to be quite inquisitive about and step in and kind of start engaging with it in a kind of take it over place. And upstairs, it's also quite interesting because it was really about how do you start creating a building, not just on the ground floor, but on the upper floors that is a canvas that people can take over. You know, typically when you have homes for rent, people aren't really allowed to do much to their houses, which makes it very difficult to take ownership of a home and call it your own. And that's where this is quite interesting because in this floor plan here, it's quite faint, but I just wanted to highlight in one floor of this building, it's called the co-living floor, the 3 different flats can actually open up into each other. And the idea of that being is kind of trying to create a bit more flexible and communal way of living. So it might be that actually this whole floor opens up for like a evening or an event or a party, or actually, you know, one parent is able to kind of look after some children that might all be sharing the same floor. And that kind of collegiate idea of community is something we wanted to explore here. So that's what that floor built out looks like. So you can see each one of these doors is to a different flat, different, almost like a hotel where you open up those kind of partition walls. They are openable on both sides, so you won't just be, you know, in there eating your dinner and somebody just pops the door open to say hello. So there is control on both sides. But actually this blank canvas here, which is quite interesting, super simple. Materials on the floor are just full sheets of plywood. The surface above is exposed concrete and the walls are just painted plasterboard. And then it's really interesting about how that gets lived in. As we always talk about building homes that have this kind of generic feel to them, but actually what does this kind of more innovative experimental house when it's lived in start to look like? And it's really interesting to see um, these homes then being taken over by residents and lived in and kind of explored, and all of those things that um, you know, left as, you know, these hooks on the ceilings that people have installed, these ability for people to be able to modify their homes has been a really important part of them feeling like they are taking ownership and living in them. And how this model works is quite interesting. So these homes are rented at least 60% below market rent, very close to social rent values. And the idea is that in return, these artists create an all year round arts program with that time and contribute time back to the community. And that's how this really interesting new innovative model works. And I think you look at concrete and you look at this building, but actually in terms of sustainability, its kilogram CO2 emissions per meter squared is only 470. And if you look at RBA's 2030 target, it's less than 625. And really the way that that's been achieved is because that concrete is using 50% GGBS, which is a byproduct of kind of iron furnace process. But the second is actually getting rid of unnecessary materials. The floor is just exposed plywood. The ceiling is the exposed structure. The outside is the exposed structure. It's just minimizing all the additional layers that go into a building is what actually has led to a massive reduction in embodied carbon, with quite a good operational energy target there as well. Very close to getting to LETI targets of 35 kilowatt per hour meter squared over a year. And this has been received very well. And I talked about how we're experimental and innovating to be able to kind of test new ways and new models of living that push the boundaries to solve problems that exist today. And that's been really well received, actually. And we've just won the Client of the Year, and actually the House for Artists has also won an RIBA award as well. So what now? So I'm going to talk about policy now. Just got 2 more bits left. And Sam, I think if you want to cut me off sooner, let me know. But I think these next 2 sections are probably another 10 minutes, I'd say.
That sounds perfect. Enough time for 1 or 2 questions, but please keep going because it's utterly fascinating.
Great. Well, if you get bored, just you can also just
Definitely
mute
not.
me and start.
No, keep going.
No worries. So now I'm going to talk about policy. So we've talked about a master plan, we've talked about a park, and we've talked about a building. And I want to talk about a policy because that's the kind of the multi layers that our team works within. Is we have that ability to actually write policy and influence policy. And this we are talking about is a policy that we're working on, or almost got a really good stage draft on, is in the Becontree Estate, which is right in the heart of the borough. And I mentioned earlier how it has 29,000 homes covering 40% of the estate. And this is what those streets used to look like 100 years ago. So it was very much built with cottage estate principles, and also garden city principles about a walkable neighborhood, which had pockets of local centres, schools and parks and kind of religious buildings always within walking distance. And again, the Becontree, closely tied to industrial heritage, is really important for why this is quite important. So that's Becontree 100 years ago, right? And this is that exact same street, now. And you can see quite a lot of change here, right? There's though it looks like not much has changed, a few things have changed the area quite drastically. One of them notably will be car ownership. And those streets kind of were never designed for the level of car ownership and car reliance that estates like this have. The second one is the homes themselves, though they were at the time pioneering for clearing slums and people finally being able to have a bathroom inside their own house. Right now, for growing family needs and multi-generational living of the diverse estate of Becontree, they're not really suitable in terms of their size. They're actually really small. So what you're starting to see is a whole load of modifications across the estate, which start to test and strain the kind of interesting cottagey character that the estate was originally built with. So the public realm has deteriorated, the homes are too small, the heritage is being threatened, and also there is a big challenge we are all facing right now is how do you retrofit at this scale? And the retrofit challenge is both vast and immediate and required. And all 4 of these things, the scale of the homes, the public realm, the retrofit challenge, and the heritage, are kind of at tensions with each other. So we're working on how do you balance these 4 things and how can you do it within a planning policy. So we set about creating a design code and a retrofit design guide for the Becontree Estate so we can look at those really interesting issues. But again, I think with all our projects, we start right back with people that live there. We know a lot by reading books and going to archives, but actually getting on the ground, speaking to people, you realize the very first thing they'll say is, I don't even know what the Becontree Estate is, and I've lived here all my life, because those 2 terms together, we as professionals and built environment experts use a lot, but actually I just live in a street, that's my shop and that's my school. I don't really associate myself necessarily with a bigger estate. So immediately you can, by getting in a close working relationship with residents, you unlock those things. And we didn't just do this by, here's a survey or what do you think with some boards in a room. We built these really lovely models. We kind of went on walking tours in the estate. We talked about what kind of things people want to do to their homes, where they are with retrofitting, what they're and we started speaking to residents at the height of the cost of living crisis. So you can imagine it's a hot topic on everyone's mind. And we did a lot of desktop research behind the scenes on this, and researched over 1,000 archive drawings that have been scanned at the Valence Museum, which have been recovered. And they involved like a 3-stage process in us getting a better understanding of how the estate is built or was built at that point, through both historic analysis of types through scanned drawings, from record drawings, observational analysis, and also understanding how homes have changed over time. And that's quite interesting, because what it told us that from those 29,000 homes, there's actually only 3 house types that cover 60 to 70% of the estate. And that's actually really good news for when you talk about how can you create a design code that applies to as many homes as possible, that aims to set a planning policy that both protects the heritage of the estate, allows people to change their homes and make them as big as possible, but also incentivize retrofit, which is a really big part of this project. And those 3 house types are spread across the borough in that estate. So with those residents, we created a residence charter. We literally got that together with those residents and right, let's write we know what the estate was. We know what the estate is because of your feedback. What do you want the estate to become? And can we distill that into some distinct sentences? So, things like Becontree homes should support multi-generational living, multicultural living, and provide places where people of home, all ages, can live and work, that should be adaptable, sustainable, and responsive. We've had multiple iterations of writing these statements with residents, so that they've established a charter for the future of this estate. And then we tried to turn that into a sketch, into a vision. So what does that start to look like when you have a public realm that's more suitable for walking, cycling, and we have homes that start adapting and changing, and we have more greenery introduced, we have facades that change? What does that start to look like in this future vision, where we have more homes that are retrofitted in car clubs, and hopefully a reduction in car ownership and reliance? And that turned it into a code. So we've got a code with 8 chapters that cover everything you would know about home extensions, from roofs, outbuildings, side extensions. The amount of hours I've spent in meetings talking about porches is probably more than I've spent talking about big master plans in the borough over the last year. And we've also created this retrofit guide in close collaboration with Archeo, which is about how do we disseminate really complex information to residents in a super simple, easy to read guide, which we are going to be sharing and publishing online. So that is a really interesting project where we work really closely with the planning department, the policy department, the Department of Levelling Up Homes and Communities, which is a central government fund department by Homes, working together with them to create a innovative new approach to writing policy and code that's both more transparent, but also can be used as a tool to incentivize retrofitting of homes. And we're going to be looking at turning that into a digital code by creating a rule-based, easy-to-click approach online that kind of, gets rid of boring big documents online and tries to turn them into something a little bit more dynamic that people today can actually use and read. And the last project is a shed. So we've bounced around all over the place now. I'm going to end with a shed because it kind of takes us back to this full circle of industry, and how industry and housing is this really important kind of the 2 kind of pivotal pillars, I guess, that underpin the history of the estate, but also where the most opportunities are. So industrialist sheds are prevalent all across quite a large part of London, but particularly Barking because of its historic legacy. And actually, it's a really important place in the big land shortage we have now, for actually unlocking opportunities for housing development of the future. So if anybody's been to an industrial park for whatever reason, whether it's to do your MOT or pick something up, you'll see they kind of typically reflect this left diagram. Lots of leaky space, lots of cars, vans, single-story sheds. What's a new model of that looks at a stacked shed, right? We're talking about houses becoming flats. that same thing can work with a shed, an industrial shed, which needs light goods vehicles going all the way up to serve some, people manufacturing carpets or computers or whatever the needs of today are. And that can unlock land for us so that we are able to develop residential areas in London where we're particularly getting short on space to develop more homes, going back to my point of how many people we have on the housing register. So we worked on a bid where we had some really good funding from the GLA and ourselves to sort of test this new model, right? This is the only stacked industrial shed model in the UK, one of its kind. It's currently on site, due to be completed in the next 2 months, working with Heworth Tompkins. And this building is really interesting. So this is an outside view of what that looks like. And these are the plans. So it's got 4 floors, and on the ground floor is where big, heavy goods vehicles can come through and go up this circular ramp, which can then serve more smaller SME type starter industrial units. And actually, we always talked about, like, flats have this way. If you live in a flat versus a house, you have this opportunity to create a community. How do you do that in the same way for industrial units? And how can you create affordable industrial units, affordable workspace, but create this kind of collegiate community and environment? So that's what this building aims to do. And as a byproduct, also free up land for residential development. So that's what that helical ramp looks like going up. And then this is some of my photos from a site visit last week. The scale of this is absolutely vast. And actually, some of the spaces look like you could be in one of the Tate galleries or Tate exhibitions, just because of how serviced some of the areas are and how big some of the ceilings are. And here's 2 images of some of the industrial spaces that you could rent, which have, are all kitted up with all the services you might need. On the left, you can actually see this really lovely skyline back towards Canary Wharf and the city. So where else in London can you rent a shed where you get a view like that? Pretty spectacular. And that's a kind of view of what that looks like above. And this is an interesting image, because what you can see there is a really industrial area where we are starting to intensify industrial uses, such as where the industry is. And on the right, you can start seeing emergence of residential new developments. And a lot of that is facilitated because we're able to intensify industrial area, which is protected by the GLA, in order to not lose this kind of really important working aspect of London out of London. And it's really important to do projects like this that unlock space like that. So on my last slide, I'm just going to leave this quote, going back to kind of working quite closely to empower residents. So this is a quote from one of the residents on our Gascoigne Residents Forum, who helped develop that park I showed you guys earlier. And this was really interesting, because we got everyone to sort of say what their kind of feedback at the end of a kind of co-design process. And Kirsty said that Barking is changing more than ever before, and the borough really cares about putting local community at the centre of change. And she said that before this forum, she had the polar opposite opinion of the council my entire life. And I think that really sums up a lot of the work we're doing. It's literally for things like this. So I'll pause it there. And that's the end of my slide, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amandeep. I mean, just an incredible amount of work. I mean, it's just sort of new renaissance for now. Incredible breadth and just I mean, the structure alone shows and demonstrates. I think when the shed was a slight misnomer, because I had an image of a garden shed, and then you show us a huge shed. So I think scale wise, it was a fantastic leap of imagination at that point. So thank you so much. We have precisely 9 minutes. I have a couple of questions that have come up through on the chat. I think, I mean, there are so many. I have loads of questions which can drill into any one of those pieces of work, but I think given time, probably can't go there. We'll have to pick them up another day.
Absolutely.
But I do have one question, which is really about, I mean, what is consistent across every single layer of what you do as a practice and as an organization, is devise a new model. Every time you go at something, you think, how can we do this differently? And you're constantly inventing new models and new ways of doing things. I guess it's a two-part question. One, where does that come from in terms of is it you as an individual or as a collective in terms of a way of thinking and a form of education? Does that come out of that? And the other part is, how do you do it? How do you persuade, given that we know the general gist, or maybe it's a perception of life generally, is people are fairly resistant to change and new ways of doing things. And there's quite a long process of trying to change minds to do that. How did you get there? How have you got there to be able to do this consistently throughout all the work you do?
Really good question, Sam. And actually, it's good you've asked that one, because that's a question I've been asked and also pondered quite a lot about in this publication that we did in the UD journal about an in-house architecture department. And I think I responded to this in two parts. So if you've got projects where you're experimenting and innovating and challenging the status quo, I felt that the two ingredients that have helped here are, one, actually having the individuals you talked about, a team that is culturally and cognitively diverse, that is actually, when you do a task and you go, surely there's a better way of doing this, right? You want people in your team or people that work that do that and actually zoom themselves out, think back strategically and come back to solve the problem from a different way. And I've always said that actually an architect's training has geared us up for this kind of strategic probing of, we always zoom out, even when we're told not to, we always tear up a brief and then we go back into it and reassemble it in different ways. And sometimes clients, and me being a client, don't love that, and sometimes they're like, oh my god, I never thought about this in a different way. So if you then bring that thinking and training, and I'm not just saying it's just the design team that does this, it's the planning team and various other parts of the different departments of BeFirst. So having at that level, the people that are doing the work being those people that challenge the kind of norms of doing things. And then what you really need is the people right at the top that are signing stuff off. So forget the middle, right at the top and right at the kind of ideas making, people problem solving. The top people need to be ready to be taking those risks, taking those leaps and saying, do you know what, that looks scary, but you put a credible idea forward and actually we want to give it a go. And I think for a long period of time, we've had that sandwich of innovation by those that are working on projects day to day, and sign off and belief and visioning from those people at the top, which includes actually, I don't know if you much about our the leader of the council, Darren Rodwell. He's very outspoken, very ambitious in a wholly Labour government that's always about wanting to be the best of the best, and you can always hear him on quotes on wanting Barking to be the green capital of the capital. So I think those two ingredients are really important. And I think your point about like, how do you persuade, I would say, like, for a while, because we've had that kind of visionary lead at the top, the persuading has been doing your homework on interesting ideas and kind of showing a different way to do stuff has been sufficient, because you've had those people that aren't we just like how we've done things at those points, and they often can be the blockers in kind of moving those ideas across. So I think not having that has meant that we're able to just quite swiftly go, right, this looks interesting, let's get on with it. Right, this looks interesting, let's get on with it. It's not the case everywhere, and I think those ingredients have really helped us here.
Great. No, it's so interesting. It says a lot about having high ambition, and the whole question about what it means to take risk, and it is fantastic. Doing your homework, very good tip. And the idea of cognitive diversity in a team is really fascinating too. Future is there. I'm going to, there are a couple of questions that came in quite early in the talk. One of them I think you've pretty well answered by going through the presentation. What from Acme, asking, do you also work with retrofit or retrofit policies other than new build? And I think that whole your co-design work and Becontree work clearly is heading in that direction, very much so. So I might skip
Yeah.
Unless I get another note from Acme to say, no, you haven't answered it fully. But given time, I think you did cover it. There was a question also very early on from Rachel Lishman asking, thanks, Amandeep, do you also appoint external engagement consultants, or do you keep all engagement in-house?
Both. We have a very small in-house team, in the same way as we have a very small design team, but we're delivering 1,800 homes that can't be delivered by 6. So we take our view more strategically, and then work with lots of really interesting engagement consultancy companies that do lots of great work. So leave the expert work to the experts.
Very good. Excellent. Okay, thank you. And then I have one more question from Ella Daly, our very own student in first year currently. Have you shown or shared this council integrated model with other London boroughs? It seems some, and their struggling planning departments, could really learn from you.
That's a really interesting question. There are lots of different council wholly owned development companies that are varying degree known of depending on their scale. Like I can count a dozen on my hand. So there's 60 Bricks, there's Wandsworth Council had one, Hounslow has one. Some of them aren't split from the council, others are. So there's various versions of them around. I think in terms of us sharing our model, we are quite regularly approached by local authorities to talk about our model and our setup. And we are, like I'm doing today, we're super open to talking about it and sharing what we do, and sharing our knowledge and everything we have. And I think one of the things that makes, from the companies I've studied, quite unique is pulling planning, regen, design together. There's often, you might have regen and a bit of design, but not planning. You might have planning and design. But I think the power of pulling planning, regen, and design together just makes a superpower, I think, to make real change in a council, basically, council-led delivery.
I mean, I think that seems to be the fundamental kind of shift, doesn't it, in terms of a way of thinking and approach, and how well, in terms of sitting in the space of education, thinking about how we're training our young architects and young people across all areas of the built environment to really be able to think and work in that way. I think is I don't know whether you see that coming through more, or whether you think there should be more of it, the cognitive diversity, as it were.
Yeah, I think so. I really think there is, lots of opportunities for. I've always said architectural training offers this huge array of tools that can be leveraged in so many industries in interesting ways. Both as working, my day job is both still being an architect with pen and paper and drawing master plans, but also being in discussions about land acquisition to put 3 bits of private developers together to create a new place. So, and that's skills that we've deployed by this zooming out thing that we're really good at, and the historical connection and understanding the root of a problem, and the fact that, Einstein's quote of doing the same thing and expecting different results is a definition of insanity. I think I get that quite regularly, and I just see people sometimes that are doing that and going, no, there's a better way. So I think really, the question is really good. And I think architects of today and now and the future definitely should and could be considering all of those ways that they can use their skills to work in these collegiate ways with people that are not necessarily in their discipline, but working more directly with them rather than this consultancy barrier, which often creates a very different collaborative relationship. Also a positive one, but I think working more closely, you can just create some really wonderful things.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Our time is well and truly up. Everybody's lunchtime is over.
Yeah.
I hope it was a nutritious one in mind and body. Thank you so much, Amandeep. Really, as I said, way too many questions. Please come back, and we could just probably have about 5 talks there, and a lot more questioning. Thank you to our everybody for joining, and to those who asked questions. Really great, and look forward to seeing you all again on another Thursday very soon. Cheerio.
Thanks, Sam.
You.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much.